organizations that he was involved in to involve women, put women on the boards. And then something that I found the most powerful is, he was choosing to spend time around women later in life that have since gone on to really do some incredible things. Pat Field Ravazio has a whole website. She was just a young reporter and kind of accidentally, kind of made the call. I was like, maybe he'll let me talk to him. And not only that, they got to spend like several days together. Mm-hmm. And of course, with this like intensity. And she really has infused that into a lot of her work and is really passionate about climate change and how, we need to inspire people, young people, with Buckminster Fuller's vision. And how his work is more important now than ever. And then there's also Amy Edmondson, who he mentored, and she is at Harvard, actually oddly in the business school, even though she had to start explaining Bucky's math and had worked with him for a while. And she can be credited for the newly installed professorship at Harvard University. So
that's a lot. Cycling back, because I didn't hit the record button until just after you'd made a mention of the publication and the name of the article.
Okay, Why Women Will Rule the World. And I believe that it was in Women's Day, Bucky writing to his audience there. And, just making a case that, women are solutionaries. Women are the visionaries that we need for the future.
Solutionary. That's a phenomenal word.
Isn't it? That's when you said it's hard to describe Bucky, I think that is exactly how I like to describe him. I like to describe him as, I like to describe him as a embodied philosopher. Mm-hmm. Of course, everybody says architect, engineer, mathematician, all kinds of things. But embodied philosopher and solutionary, I think, fit the bill perfectly.
Oh, man. And I think that this particular podcast is going to fit the bill perfectly just as well. Episode, oh no. It says 64 in the corner. I was afraid of this. I was afraid that this was going to happen at some point, that I was going to hit that. You know what? We're just going to take a moment on this podcast. I'm going to flip back to Elizabeth. I'm going to fix this.
Okay, what's it supposed to be? 63?
Do what? You're 65. You're
okay.
65.
All right.
So, anywho, WTF Carbondale podcast, the podcast where we talk to interesting people about their interesting lives, tie it all back to this little old place we call home, Carbondale, Illinois. Episode 65, which will be reflected here shortly. Elizabeth Donoghue, part of the Buckminster Fuller series that I happened to just kind of fall into. Bumped into Judy Ashby a couple of weeks ago. We got to talking about just what's something we could do for the Bucky Dome. Just as things are kind of opening back up, and as John Davies said on the previous episode, they're starting to give tours again, and anyway, so connected with Elizabeth, and she is.
Yeah, I think for Carbondale in general, obviously we have that amazing artifact that is the dome home, and that was really my doorway into discovering Bucky, and that's a whole story that we could go into, but it's the legacy and the potential and the uniqueness really is a relationship between SIU, Carbondale, and the whole region. So it makes us unique.
So you said that your kind of introduction into this was the radio show?
It was, well, yes. Okay, so here's the story.
That's what we're looking for.
So we have this in common, Comm Studies alumni here. Woohoo. And I was in graduate school. I was studying environmental rhetoric, environmental messaging, and I came across and was looking at this concept of the apocalyptic narrative. Now, I happened to find Buckminster Fuller through studying the apocalyptic narrative. I'd come across this idea of utopia or oblivion, and of course, well, that is kind of that can explain the apocalyptic narrative for you rather simply.
Yeah.
So But what I was really surprised at is beyond this, okay, you have a utopia or oblivion, he really, like a lot of other environmental appeals, he really held out solutions and was ultimately immensely, I want to say, like catching on. He was positive, he knew that solutions were possible, and spent the better part of his life searching for them and talking about them. Now here's the thing. So I was at SIU doing graduate study and studying this thing. I actually lived on Forest Street, the block before the Dome home. I also got my undergrad from SIU and left and came back. And it wasn't until through researching the apocalyptic narrative for graduate study that I came across Buckminster Fuller's name. And then I found out, wow, he was at SIU? And then I found out, because at that time, that was in the late aughts. I swore I was the person that would never say aughts, but there I am.
Here we are.
Yes. And that was, at that time. And I just was shocked that I had never heard this story. And I rode past the Dome home every day. And at that time, it was covered in plastic. So I didn't know, exactly what to make of it. It didn't have signage. Again, I had no idea what it was. And so as I started looking into it and finding out about the history, I have been doing a radio show for over a decade. It's called Greenhouse Rebellion on WDBX, local, global, personal, political. And I decided that I would reach out and interview somebody associated with the Dome home. At that time as well, there was a letter, I think it was in the DE, somebody had written that lived in the Arbor District, and they were frustrated about the plastic, like basically saying, what's happening here, right? Like, why is this covered in plastic? It's it's bringing us down a little bit for this to be going on for a while. And I kind of thought, well, let's find out. And so I had reached out, and at that time it was Cornelius Crane. He was the outgoing president of the Dome home. He came in and he did an interview. He actually used to do a show on WDBX. I forget the title of it, but he was just on fire about it, right? Just like, wow, I didn't know these things. It just, with Fuller, it's this interesting thing that happens that I've seen it happen to me, and then I've since seen it happening to other people where, you kind of dip your toe in. And then before you know it, just all these coincidences are happening, and then it's just, it's very expansive. Okay.
Carbondale is like a one big coincidence.
It really,
that's the feeling.
It really is. And, it has, Fuller more than anything has made me just question coincidence and purpose and kind of in the larger part of the legacy with everything that we have going on in the world now, and this being Carbondale. So anyway, I, reached out. I found out he was the outgoing president. And so then I reached out to the board. I was told, well, you should come to a board meeting and, ask what's going on. My question really was, can we take the plastic off of the Dome home? I just thought like it was such a shame that you couldn't even take it off for like a little bit, like a few dry days. And I went to a board meeting asking that question, and that there's a whole long story, but I had, before moving back to Carbondale, I had worked in the nonprofit sector for a theater company in the development arena, and we had mounted a successful capital campaign, and long story short, I ended up being like the first paid employee of the Dome home.
Oh, okay, that's very cool.
Yes, and it was only for a little bit, but and there was, it was a very interesting time, but we mounted a capital campaign, and one of the first things that I did was take all the information about the Save America's Treasure Grant, and we revised it and resubmitted. And I think in the grand scheme of things, I know that I only have I played this really small little part, but I think one of the things, and this goes back again to studying communication, I think I was able to distill some of the narrative around the dome home. I, wrote, it's the only dome he ever lived in, the only home he ever owned.
Yeah.
And I love that since that time, people have told me that. And that's that is a feeling like I'm addicted to that feeling, actually.
When your language becomes part of the common vernacular.
Yes. And
I'm
of course,
aware of that feeling. It's a very intense feeling
it
when
really
your own
is.
language gets back to you.
It really is. And of course, these are facts, but they weren't necessarily being put together in the same way, that kind of thing. And I became, really honestly, I became obsessed.
Yeah.
I think some of it was that I had been in the graduate study communication world, which is amazing, wonderful. I think it's one of the best majors that you can have for so many reasons, but it's a lot of talking. And all of a sudden, I was surrounded by people that had built things and were building things and doing things and envisioning change on some level instead of, talking theoretically. And I really, I became obsessed with it. I put it kind of at the center of my life, and I hijacked almost every single conversation that I had for about 2 years. I like to joke that I can relate anything to Bucky. You want to just talk about diapers? I can get back to Bucky somehow. Do you know what I mean? And so for about 2 years, I was on a mission to, I felt like at that time that we needed to make people believe us that this was going to happen, and also I felt like Carbondale's a weird relationship, with. I have chosen several times to stay in Carbondale, and I needed hope. I needed to believe that there was some change and there was some vision. And for me, Fuller had that. It was inspiring. It was an inspiring world. I really have to thank Bill Perk, who purchased the dome and made it into the nonprofit, and it was actually him that was the reason that I was able to be funded as development director for a while. And I think that there was a lot of good work that was done during that time. It was obviously a relay race and time for me to move on to different things, but I learned a lot. And what I learned actually more than anything is, as important as the dome home is, the vision, the work, especially related to Carbondale, is so much bigger than just that artifact. And that's, I think, what I've been trying to take on since leaving that. And now I work at the university. I'm assistant director at the University Honors Program at SIU. And we have started a Fuller Saluki initiative in which we really relate, because Fuller was a comprehensivist. He liked looking at the big picture. He was doing this before anybody was talking about the importance of being interdisciplinary and that. And so the honors program is really unique in the sense that it's a completely interdisciplinary program. It is undergraduate students from, every program on campus pretty much. And so it seemed to be a perfect place to kind of situate that narrative. And we currently have the director of the honors program, Dr. Kapoor, Jyotsna Kapoor, is teaching a class called the Aesthetic Impulse, centered around Buckminster Fuller, that's going on right now. That was a 1-month summer class. And then in the fall, John Davey will come, and he is teaching the design theories of Buckminster Fuller. And so it's been real interesting. I've been there for about 3 years now, and we've brought some people to town. We had the past president of the Buckminster Fuller Institute come, David McConville. That was amazing. He introduced us to Kurt Prisbilla, who has been back since then, but held several workshops on campus. And so the work continues. I mean, and I'm really happy to see where the Dome Home is and to have a good relationship there that can, make some, I think, exciting things flourish. I mean, I have ideas.
It's what we need as ideas.
Yes.
Like you just have to envision something. I was just watching the Healing Illinois presentation that Nancy Maxwell was putting on with essentially everybody, right?
Yeah.
Right, like everybody that's anybody in like the the upstart activist community in Carbondale, and like there's vision there, like holy,
Yes.
like
Yes.
comprehensive, that stretches through all different components of systems
Completely.
and institutions and like types of people, and it's really neat to see and just like be around it.
Yes. And it's not any coincidence. I think that has some of Fuller's ideas and legacy infused in it. I know, the things that are going on there.
Yeah.
But I was reflecting on that, and I think that's one of the things that when I was talking about this idea that, I fell in love with Fuller and this whole like world, and especially related to Carbondale and how I needed to be hopeful about Carbondale. What attracted me, what continues to attract me, is this eternal hopefulness that he had. And this also, that there's nothing too outlandish. And to be quite frank, I think that's what Carbondale needs.
Yeah.
We need to be like dreamers right now. And like any idea is not too much.
Yeah.
Bold as you can go is, I think, what is going to save us in the end, help us.
The thing that gives a pathway to a pursuit of boldness is like when you have an opening, right? Like we've got an opening, like when things are down, right? When there are just like opportunities for people to like break into activity because like the traditional systems just aren't as strong as they once were, and it's like
Yes.
now because of that more
Yes.
people simply have access because there are fewer gates to get through.
Yes.
To achieve power and change and action and outcomes, and
Yeah.
it all matches up.
I completely agree with you. It makes me think of news on Wednesday. I talked about this on the radio show where Big Oil had 3 major blows.
Yeah.
Right? They Exxon stacked the board against them, their own shareholders. Shell Oil, the Dutch government basically said, you've got to reduce, just gave them a big blow. I'm forgetting the third one now, but 3 of the biggest oil companies having these huge things happen. And I think that obviously it's from activists doing work for a long time, incrementally over a, lot of time and space and energy and people's blood, sweat, and tears going into that. But I also think the timing of that is perfect in the sense of the pandemic, because we saw, at least I did in a whole fresh way, what you think is normal and just has to like run as business as usual, all of a sudden, it turns out it doesn't.
Yeah.
That it can. And I really think, especially with Big Oil losing all that money, from the pandemic, that there was a moment there that was taken. And so I find that really interesting. But I completely am with you. I feel like that with regards to Carbondale as well.
Yeah.
One of the things that I feel really hopeful about is that Buckminster Fuller, for a while, I feel like the SIU was resisting embracing Fuller.
Yeah.
And embracing that legacy. And now I think they're going to run with it.
Yeah.
You can find it on their webpage. And one of the things from the honors program, we applied, they had for the anniversary that was in 2020, I believe, or 2019. They had an award that you could apply for to do something creative or, that kind of celebrated the anniversary. The honors program applied for that in order to do something with Bucky's Haven on campus. And our original vision was like, nobody really knows the story on campus of that dome, right? That how it's connected to Fuller or anything. And so we applied for that grant, received it, and were able to have a program in which we invited an artist. He's actually I think, director of the Fuller Dome in Edwardsville, which is another important structure, but also really important connection. He does this amazing art, and he did an installation in the Bucky's Haven on campus, and we put a sign up on campus that has Bucky's famous quote about making the world work for humanity, and for 100% of humanity without ecological destruction, and then also just giving some of that history. And so that was really good and very well received by the university. And I think there's more of that to come.
Do you have a bit of the background on Bucky's Haven? That's definitely one of the things that we didn't talk about yesterday with John Davey. I mean, again, there are only so much time, and anything that I miss between your conversation and John's conversation, I feel like is like I've got Bill scheduled for like an afternoon.
Yeah, that's going to be important there. Maybe a few days. No.
But no, I mean, just more on the story of Bucky's Haven on campus.
Now, Bill probably might have some more history about that because I've looked and I don't have. What I do know is it was the same company that provided the Dome home, provided that structure as well. The same, company that was, I think, Ira Parrish. And so it had to be, I mean, there were points where domes were all over campus. If you see some aerial shots, from the 60s, you have domes in places, I've spotted 3 or 4 that were in clusters on campus.
Really?
And so I think that as far as I remember, Bucky's Haven went up in the early 70s, so like 72. And, I'm imagining that they just thought it was a good thing to do.
Yeah.
Fuller's here, why not?
Well, the one of the things you had talked about, and I can you restate the gentleman's name who was the former director of the Buckminster Fuller Institute? Because you had him come speak.
Yes.
Was it 2 or 3 years ago? Because was that the gentleman that I got to meet?
David McDonald. Yes, it was. So Dave McDonald, he was the former institute of the Buckminster, or the former director of the Buckminster Fuller Institute. And he's involved in a really interesting project now called Spherical. His work it's very much like Fuller too, where it's kind of hard to define and explain, but he is dealing with, he's a solutionary, and he is dealing with these like large concepts and really ways that we view and see the world and effects on us. And so we've, since that visit, have really, the honors program has developed a really positive relationship with him. He's been a virtual guest in several classes.
Oh, great.
And gosh, it would be great to have him back, and I think he felt a really special connection to Carbondale as well.
Well, that leads me into this logo that is over your left shoulder. When I talked to him about this brand specifically at the time, and
Nice.
was talking about design and whatever else, he was like, "Oh, you should incorporate carbon 60 into it, or you should make it carbon 60 or whatever else." So while it's not very legible from this state, even like as I'm looking at it close up on a computer screen, that little ball where Carbondale is to represent Carbondale on the WTF Carbondale, Illinois structure, there is a carbon 60 molecule.
I love it. I love it. I love it.
And just it was just a suggestion that stuck with me, and so when it came time to put pen to paper, so to speak, that was it. So thank you for facilitating that interaction that has had.
Oh, that's all coming back to me now. I think that you were running for office at that time.
Oh yeah.
I believe. Okay, you're like, when am I not running for office?
Yeah, that's
I'm
kind
kidding.
of the
I'm joking. Which is interesting too. I came across something recently with Bucky saying he wanted a design revolution. He was going the route of a design revolution instead of a political revolution, and of course he had one of my favorite quotes from him is when you want to change something, don't focus on people, focus instead on the systems that they use.
Yeah.
So that makes the behavior that you want to change, basically unnecessary. If you change that system, you can change the behavior without, telling them that they just have to change their behavior.
Well, and it's so interesting from an architectural standpoint, right? Because
Yeah.
governments are essentially in the business of creating structures, right? So the key participants in any sort of government function is that of the builder, right? Whether it's a road or a building or a water system or whatever it may be.
Yes.
Right. That
Yes.
design dictates really what you can do at any other point
It's
with
so true.
policy down the road.
Yes.
And how that impacts other people and how that impacts the whole of people's lives.
Yeah. I completely, obviously, he was, he lived through several contentious eras politically, but I had thought about that at the local level, because I do think you can have a design revolution by changing your local politics.
Yeah.
I think they work together.
Intricately tied.
Yes.
That's phenomenal. No, so one of the questions that I always kind of work to lead off with, but obviously we're Bucky themed here, so it's there's no pointed question to start off with, but the I asked folks, how did you come to be in Carbondale? But you've had multiple coming to and going from Carbondale stories.
Multiple lives. I say that multiple lives. So I came to Carbondale as an undergraduate. We'll be vague about years, just cause.
Yeah.
And
I'm on board.
and I came as an undergraduate because at that time, my family lived around St. Louis and Columbia, Illinois. And so that's an hour and a half away. And I figured, Carbondale would still have that party image when I came. And I kind of liked that,
There's nothing wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with that.
That's why a lot of people are still here.
Yes, I wanted my college years to be fun and good. I was a first generation student, and I thought, this is a place I can go where it's far enough away that I have to live there, but close enough that I can go home anytime I want.
Yep.
And of course, I met quite a few people from Chicago who were like, I chose this because it's the farthest I could get and still be in state. So yeah, I came as an undergraduate student, and of course, left because that's what you do. You come and you go. I went to Austin, Texas, lived for a little while, may have partied a little too much, decided, just lived life, right? Yeah. And decided, right before I left, I had been working in an office, the Office of Special Events and Projects, that at that time was the President and Chancellor's domain, which really, as an undergrad, I had no idea I was walking into that. And historically speaking, I look back now and think about the things I learned there and what I kind of had privy to as an undergraduate student. It connected to President Chancellor's office. It was wild. Anyway, but before I had left, the people I worked for were like, I think because they felt for me because I was a theater major, right? And like, you should think about grad school. And if you ever want to do that, you can come back and you have an assistantship. And so I was like, no. I always say I'm like the accidental academic. And I think that kind of is Carbondale a little bit in a way. It's completely changed my life, obviously, in some really positive ways, or opened things up to me that I don't think in any other scenario I necessarily would have taken or gone to. And so after a little while in Austin, I was like, I was waiting tables. And I'm like, grad school might not be so bad. I was waiting tables and playing some music, but I'm like, I think I could just go back. And so I went back, came back, and got a master's degree in comm studies. And at that time, I went to Chicago and worked for the theater company that I was talking about. And then I was I was married at the time and got pregnant. And we decided, with some influence from some other people in Carbondale, that maybe moving back wouldn't be a bad decision.
Yeah.
There were multiple people that I knew that were pregnant that were here, at the same time. We would be closer to family. There were a lot of reasons. And so we ended up renting a place, sight unseen, in Carbondale, but it was somebody we trusted, and we moved back, and I've been here ever since. So, and did go to grad school again, and am still, I am not actively working, but I will return to finish my PhD. I got as far as my prelims and putting that on pause. So,
I mean, the nice thing about schooling in the modern era is there's not a time limit on it, right? That everybody's kind of just come to this realization in higher education that it's an ebb and flow, and you educate as you experience through life.
Yeah.
And,
and I saw that the academic side as I had a child that was like 2 when I started, which now I think about it, I'm like, what were you thinking starting a PhD program when your kid was 2? What?
Yeah.
She's 18 now. That's how long that's been. And so, I had some things kind of as at the tail end, had some things, just life happening. And that, oddly enough, though, is what led me to, it was time to leave, graduate school for a while. And that's when I started working for the Dome. And and I think, too, I had been in it for a while, and just that I was just thirsty for something else. And it was another world. It was another mission. And I took it on and, did the best that I could.
So what was it like? I mean, because John said on the previous episode, you guys had to raise matching funds for all of that.
Yeah. I'll never forget. So I'll never forget getting the news that we won, and then going and telling Bill Perk, who was at the library. He has a routine and it includes the library, and we knew we'd find him there. And it was great. It was a breakthrough moment, I feel. But then there also was the matching funds, aspect. And I remember when we went to the board, there was somebody at that meeting that was like, oh, but we kind of like, yay, we won this. What do you mean we have to raise, But I think that it made it real in a way, because what had happened was the Dome home was under plastic for a long time. Mm-hmm. It was, although people were active, and I really do think now when I look historically, I think everybody was needed. Do you know what I mean? It looks like things were stagnant, but Bucky has this phrase, respect gestation rates. And I feel like it was a gestation rate. Yeah. And one of the things I became aware of is like people were like, oh, well, that's been it was hard to talk people into giving their money when they've just seen a dilapidated building for many years and not a lot of movement on it or around it or plans. There was no there were plans being talked about, but nothing like, let's see them. Do you know what I mean? And so at least like public view, it's down to the, like this many inches and feet here, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that the grant really was a moment where it was like, oh, we needed somebody else outside of us to believe in us. And then other people started taking note as well. And so, yeah.
It just kind of comes together. No, that'll scare people off a board real fast when a big number like that comes down the pipeline and people go, hey.
And there was a whole mindset. I think that this is indicative of a lot of nonprofits, and it's also why nonprofit leadership is a hard job.
Yep.
And raising money for a nonprofit is a hard job.
Yeah.
Because you really have to get everybody on board. And I won't lie and say there was resistance. There was some big resistance. And there were people on the board that were like, I'm not down for this. I'm not asking anybody for $5, you know? Because I remember even being at meetings going, just one of the big thing was I was like, okay, so we need everybody here to give. And there were people that were flat out like, not doing that. Like
Yeah.
I've gave this much time and years of my life to certain things, and I'm, no. So that was a transition time.
Yeah.
I like to say.
Yeah, no, I mean, and it's, there's nothing wrong with folks being like, hey, this isn't for me in this way and shape, right? It's just
Yeah.
being able to know where you can move from.
Yeah.
Right. And no, I mean, you just respect people's boundaries at that point. You say, okay, cool. Well, this is the team that I have. This is the team that I move forward with. And that's kind of that. And you will find people that join you along the way just as well. Cause I'm sure it's not like you just went out there and there weren't people that weren't, let's do this.
Yes. Oh, and that really was the game changer, really, was finding the right people that came along to do what was needed at the right time. But everything that you're saying there, I learned it through this process.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
And at the time, of course, because I was so invested, that I ended up taking things personally sometimes, because, well, why wouldn't you get on board with everything?
Yeah.
And now I see the process really for what it is. And, I'm just delighted with the work that's been done. It's amazing. It's beautiful. Yeah. And, people that there's access to it. And I think now John probably talked about this. I'm not privy, I'm not on the board. Mm-hmm. I do have a working relationship with John to some extent, that is good and positive, but I don't get regular updates on everything. But I do know some of the vision was and is still, I'm imagining, to have an interpretive center, mm-hmm. To have it to build other structures on top of this one that is, it becomes the tourist site that people will and have already made the trek for just to see. And so we want to make sure that they have other things to see, like Bucky's Haven, mm-hmm. like things on campus, and like the interpretive center that they can do when they get here.
Well, I can imagine somebody, right, if we're talking about Chicago specifically or any, metro along the route here, shucks, that's not to say that people wouldn't come up from New mm-hmm. Orleans to come see what's going on in Carbondale. I know it sounds completely crazy. The place that people travel to would have people travel from, but that's a real thing, right? You hop
kidding?
Off the train.
No, yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
It's true. Like that was one of the things I found too. When you're a development director, you start, actually I had to kind of check myself. Everybody becomes kind of about like what they can give, right? Yeah. And all the searches that I did for people, I ended up finding out that one of the creators of Twitter mm-hmm. is a big bicyclist. And goes on these cross-country trips, mm-hmm. and is also a huge fan of Buckminster Fuller.
Huh.
And that's also you do find that in the tech world, and a lot of worlds really where underdogs have triumphed and changed things dramatically. Mm-hmm. You'll find a lot of Fuller fans in that arena, and so I happened to find out that he was a big Fuller fan and had biked through Carbondale. Yeah. And I was like, gosh, that is a whole thing we're not tapping into, as far as, but bike trails, the train, everything really. And it does become, I think, a selling point.
No, it's just the question of identifying who's been through here mm-hmm. and going back to them, right?
Yeah.
For any and everything. I was on a podcast a couple days ago, and was talking to the host about if they themselves book Jim Belushi on their show, because they've had like other famous comedians on the show, and was like, okay, listen, if you get that connection, point Jim Belushi back to Carbondale just for a minute. I don't need him for a while. I just need him for a day or two. Right. And those relationships are abound with this place.
Yes.
In a way that doesn't exist in your typical small town university America, or small.
But I do think that what you are tapping into, and I think too, when you were running for mayor, we talked about this, and it was so refreshing for me, because this is something I had been thinking about, like how we reposition Carbondale as the place to relocate, or the place to be. And what's happening right now is, there are towns that have identified mm-hmm. that as thing that's going to be happening.
Yep.
But also with the pandemic and people kind of emptying out of cities,
Accelerated it.
there are towns where that's accelerated, and there's whole tracks on like TikTok and Instagram of people that have relocated and like will compare what they were paying in their big city to what they're paying now and what they get, and how much simpler and better life is, and they're working remotely and they have all the money that they want to travel and do those things and be explorers when they want. This is what I think Carbondale is poised and ready and should just take the charge for.
And here's the deal. You know, this is one of those things where you know, the idea was out there in the open before it was in everybody else's purview. It's like just a lot of things like that in Carbondale, but we're not necessarily the first to kick over with it, and that's okay. You don't have to be first to do it so long as you just at some point in time follow through.
Yeah.
Right? Like I don't care how many times I have to get up and stump on this, like, and I don't care if it's me that ends up following through with it. The idea is that somebody's got to do this shit, man.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's. I was listening to something recently where it was more in the entrepreneurial aspect, but saying like a lot. There's sometimes
on that Gary V TikTok. No, I'm just kidding.
No. It's addictive, isn't it?
It's awful.
Anyway, this idea that sometimes I'll say if you're first, you've lost.
Yeah.
Because it takes, and you can relate that to Bucky in a sense that he never experienced wild success in his life. Of course, he was successful. He traveled the world. He got these ideas out. He has all of these wonderful like artifacts and people that are inspired by him and doing the work. You know, he was definitely a success, but like a lot of his things and the things he was talking about did not take traction in his lifetime. Now is actually the moment when they make more sense than ever. And so I think it's a timing thing, definitely, but I really hope Carbondale can get on board with that. And really, I've been trying to think of all kinds of ways, you know, to market, because I just think there is something to this being with climate change, with the carbon 60 and the Fuller's influence on that, and the Fullerene, and you know, solutions that can be that are being made around that. That there's something to be done to reposition us as really a center for, you know, the change that's going to happen. If you can do it here and be a success, it can happen anywhere.
Yeah. Oh, and if you can make that adaptation in this space, right? You know, there's all sorts of people that are involved in the ecological fight in Southern Illinois, where we have had this resource extraction and all of the pitfalls that come with that, all of the leaching of coal ash and oil derricks and fracking and all of these things, you know, even at the limited scale that they may occur in Southern Illinois. Coal, not so much. Some of these other things, you know, definitely. It's not a Texas or a Wyoming or whoever's got the big shale fields right now. But you know, it is very accessible. It is very visible. The effects of it are very clear, right? I think of you know, a cluster of rare cancer in like the West Frankfort area, where like kids are living with things that, you know, 1 in 100 million people have, but there's 5 or 6 kids that have this in that space. Like, these are very real things occurring in Southern Illinois, and I don't know where I was coming from with my trailing off of thought here, other than to say that this fight exists here, right? But also the you know, the problem and the solution exist here, and they are constantly butting heads with one another. And like this is the you know, how it's playing out all over the world. This is just as representative as anything that's going on anywhere else.
It really is. I think in some way it's ground zero for so many of those overlapping issues. Yeah. Even talking like geographically in our country, you know, so I think Southern Illinois has been used as extraction zone, sacrifice zone, and that needs to be transformed, you know, on a major level to I don't know, regenerative zone, something, just an example, holding out. One of the things the university did recently, the chancellor, spent a year listening, doing listening circles and sessions. And from that, unexpectedly, he, went back to crafting his plan for the university and came out with 5 pillars for the university to focus on. He did not expect for sustainability to be one of those pillars. But because of everything everybody was saying in those meetings, and because of our really unique history at the university, Buckminster Fuller being like the start of it, really, to some extent, leveraging that and expanding it. And so sustainability is one of the 5 pillars of SIU now. And I love that.
I was really appreciative. We've had Treasurer Ferricks in this building once before for an event that he was kind enough to headline, and then saw today just on LinkedIn that Chancellor Lane was part of a group of speakers, participating in programming with the state treasurer's office for some higher education funding things. And it's like that's it. Like, that's how you continue to work to put this place back on the map. And that is a leadership that is bottom up, has delivered to him the ideas. His actions follow through on that, and then hopefully the people that are all throughout the university can commit to their own actions to serve.
I just was excited about the sustainability, but I do think too, there's something with the university and the town where we've had a long spell of that's not possible.
Yeah.
No, can't happen.
Yep.
And we really need the yes. It can happen. Not only not no, but how, right? And to make it happen and to see things as possible. That's another thing with Fuller. Fuller talked a lot about education, and how children are born geniuses. He would say, and the process of educating them in our country de-geniuses them.
Yeah.
And that children, if you let them, are just way smarter than we ever give them credit for, and often have the solutions. And there was even a book that came out that was nothing but a transcript of him spending a whole couple days with 3 middle schoolers that were chosen, for that project. And I thought that was really, because he never saw children as lower than himself. He saw them as equals in the way of thinking or creating solutions.
Yeah.
I say that because I do think that's kind of where we're at. Where I this might be controversial. I'm sorry if it is, but I do think Carbondale suffers from having a little bit of an old boys network.
Yeah.
That has not served the area at all. And we quit listening. If honestly, if I was in charge here, it would be mandatory that we have a student on city council, like all the time, that we need to listen to the people, to students, to young people, basically, that are residents here. And they know what they're talking about,
Well, I mean, it's with kids, with young folks in general, people would still look at me and go, he's just a whippersnapper, right? It's like their understanding of the world around him is natural, simply because they take it from what nature cues them to, right? When I was talking to John about this on the previous episode, I was talking about the architectural design of a fish, and how that plays into the design of a vehicle, right?
Yes.
And it's the same idea that like a kid can look at a tree and extrapolate things from that tree that, a jaded adult who's been forced to like think in a very narrow band may not observe the world. So to open up and to take on, kids and the way that they think and feel, and also to not, I really appreciate this when talking to Chastity for episode 63, about how, as parents, for them, and I was in very much agreement with her, that they have talked to their kids as if they were people their entire lives.
Yeah.
Right. You give them just as much of that bandwidth and they will absorb it as you're willing to offer.
Right. And then you don't have to, I remember this from a Fuller speech that I saw where he said a lot of his life has been spent actively trying to unlearn the things that he learned the wrong way, that were wrong, and so ideally we would have a system of parenting like Chastity is talking about, where it's like you don't have to unlearn certain things. We definitely don't give young people enough credit.
Yeah.
I get, especially because I work with young people, I sometimes think I have like the best job on campus because I get to work with amazing students, and I love it. And I don't see a lot of apathy. A lot of times the narrative seems to be that like young people don't care, and of course they're honor students, but they are very aware of what the world that they are inheriting and walking into. Yeah. And that also, I think, is the reason that sustainability is one of the pillars, right, for SIU now. Because I think that was the message over and over again is if we're recruiting the best students, guess what the best students are working on? Solutions for climate change.
I had Nelson Fernandez on. He doesn't have to be in your program as well.
It sounds familiar, but he might not be mine.
So he's been part of the leadership of the crew that has installed the turbine on the green roof.
Yes. I do have a few students that are in that project. Yes.
And it speaks to exactly like where we're at, like where is leadership going to be, what is going to inspire the people that will be leadership 20 years from now, what is going to fuel their fire.
Right.
I would love, now that we're kind of talking through this, and I've have tried to figure out, well, what's my best way to reach out to students. And I think staying in connection with you on this and getting university honors folks to come in and do the podcast, because this is a really comfortable space for folks to get just comfortable with the interview dialogue, right? And after they leave here, like it's been a good hour of like talking that they may or may not have experienced before in this kind of structure with a lack of structure, right? The structure of the media creation, but the lack of structure in the free flow of questions, where as people learn more about them, they will have to disclose more in presentation of themselves just through the course of conversation, and then having that documented and so on and so forth.
Yeah. And the more ideas that we can listen to and really take to heart and try to implement, the more students that we'll have flocking to be here. There was one student that I want to talk about that really left an impression on me, and it's interesting because she ended up, being influenced by Fuller. But when the IPCC report came out, she printed that out and had it in her backpack at all times, tattered little copy. Do you know what I'm saying? And basically was like, how am I at a university where nobody's like freaking out about this? Took it everywhere. She ended up being really instrumental in getting the chancellor before Lane to come, the interim chancellor, John Jackson, to sign the Second Nature Climate Agreement. And so now, that's in the new chancellor's lap, and the need to create a climate action plan, to measure our carbon footprint. I just kind of think, we're running from behind on some of these things, both SIU and Carbondale. But they're things that there's no reason that we can't get ahead of really quick. Yeah. We have the ingenuity to do it. We have the people that have the talent to do it. So let's do it.
Oh man, well, I hadn't even thought about this idea up until like you're talking through this now. What if that coal factory became a museum that addressed everything that led up to
Yes.
a sustainable revolution in energy, right?
Yes.
Like, my father was a coal miner,
Yeah.
and I've come from a family of coal miners, engineers, and grunts just the same. And the reality is there is an identity associated with energy creation.
Yes. And the identity is, yes, of the coal miner.
Yep. And there's nothing wrong with transitioning that and having that same level of pride that people take in going underground and burrowing out the earth
Yes.
to provide electricity to the entire world, about taking that and transitioning that identity and that pride into the next stage, the next phase of what energy production is.
Yes. I am with you. Yes. And yes. I love the idea of having that be a museum because I do think we need to honor. So the reason that we moved to Columbia, Illinois was we were in Texas and my family was affected negatively by the oil crash there and eventually had to make the way to Illinois because he had gotten a job as a coal miner. Working third shift. I will never forget. We had to tiptoe around.
Oh my
that
God.
kind of thing. Yes.
Ah, somebody who understands. Oh my God.
And
swing shifts every 2 weeks.
yes.
You never knew what you were allowed to do. I was an only child with no neighbors. Grew up
I
in
hit a
house.
nerve. I
Oh.
see. No. Yes. No. I will never forget that. And
Oh.
he did it for a couple years as a transition, and then ended up owning a business and being quite successful at that. But a real struggle there for a while as a coal miner, and so I know and have a deep respect for that.
Yep.
I'm never going to be dissing, you know what I mean, people that have that as a job because quite frankly it is still providing a lot of our energy. There's a whole thing about the Illinois coal, et cetera, but
I had an argument with a Politico friend of mine who's working on the Darren Bailey campaign. That I like, he tried to be like, oh, something Illinois coal. I was like, dude, we don't even use our coal in Illinois for Illinois coal. Like, don't feed me this line of crap.
But what we do is we contribute what we use to make the problem that we're trying to solve much worse.
Yeah.
And so I think that we need to honor that. We need to honor the coal miners. We need to have a coal to soul program or a coal to, this is actually, I didn't come on to kind of promote the, bills to be passed basically for the CEJA, and I'm blanking on the new one that was just through
CESSA.
Yeah, just
I've gotten emails about them. Like
basically,
it's like a 5-letter acronym as opposed to a 4.
Yeah, advocating for that transition in an equitable, just way that makes us really special and doesn't leave anybody out. Because I think that's the thing that people are going to be afraid of. But also that link between generations, I think that's a little more fragile than we like to think. Because I think I've talked to coal miners like, I don't want my kids doing this. They see that transition needs to be made, but we need to just make sure that it's going to something else. I would love the fact that we could the coal is doing exactly what it should be doing when it's in the ground. It's sequestering carbon there. So let's keep it there and pat ourselves on the back for doing that. And find another way. It's really evolutionary in a way if you think about it with, that poster I'm sure you've seen where it's like man from, the evolution of man or whatever. It's like looking down to looking to
and then
being
looking back
upright.
at the phone. No.
I think, right, that one too. But I think of that with our energy transition. It's like this focus on the ground, on darkness, on, going as far down as we can to focusing on sun and wind and solutions. And it's completely an evolution of thought and action.
Yeah. No, that's so cool. Thank you for being I feel it's cool that I don't really talk to coal miners kids often, right? I'm not always running across people who's So
no, that's
just somebody that understands
it's ingrained. It is there to stay, right? and just kind of that struggle. It was your life is built around that, obviously. And I remember that the metal lunchbox. Okay, we can have a whole thing there.
No, I 15-ish years of that. That was my
Wow.
that was my entire life up
Wow.
until my dad then went and taught at Wren Lake, taught coal mining. Now he's a mine inspector, or at least was the last time I. Anyway, neither here nor
I
there.
couldn't imagine 15. I have to say that was so intense that just the few years that
Yeah.
it was the family, dynamic, that 15 years would be a lot.
Yeah. Well,
That's
I
a
mean,
lot.
and you hear about Bob Murray of
Yeah.
Murray Energy, who
Yeah.
who has since passed away.
Yep.
Rest his soul.
Died a millionaire.
I remember Uncle Bob, the DuQuoin State Fair for the Kerr-McGee Energy, family picnic and whatever else, and to years later see this dude just getting roasted by John
Yeah.
Oliver on HBO.
Yeah.
It was just
Yeah.
6 degrees of
I've seen
separation is
that guy,
interesting.
right? Completely. And that's the thing with Fuller as well. He identified the climate change was happening.
Yeah.
It wasn't in the vernacular like it was, but he saw this, coming at a distance,
Yeah.
definitely, and knew those systems, would have to change. That we don't, we keep it. It's like a bank account. Keep it in there. Keep the coal in the ground.
Yep.
If we ever did need it, but
It's
hopefully
literally
we
your
won't.
saving. It's saving you from all the carbon in the
Exactly.
atmosphere.
Oh my gosh, I had a moment once visiting Terry Bryant's office where we were. I was obviously there advocating for a, energy bill of some kind.
Yeah.
For renewables or I forget what. I've been to her office several times actually. She was sitting. Her desk is right in front of this huge map of coal fields of Southern Illinois, and there was this moment where she was like, "But look at all this we've got." You know what I mean? And I'm like, "But that's actually doing a great job in the ground, like
Yeah.
what it's supposed to be doing."
Look at all these ways that we're absorbing carbon as a region.
Yeah.
And we've done
Yeah.
good for the earth by keeping it in the ground.
Yeah,
It's good.
I think this is a really important moment because we get so resistant to change.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of the argument against that transition is just against changing that dynamic
Yeah.
of the family line and the family coal miner,
Mm-hmm.
and this is what you do, and there's just songs about it. Come
Oh, yeah,
on,
it's the heroification of
Yes.
the
Yes.
American identities.
There's a
that-
whole
that-
myth around it, right? There's a whole identity that we can change that and give just as much, respect and grace and gratitude
Yep.
to this new generation, even maybe a little more because they're saving us,
yeah.
From a future that we don't want,
Well,
basically.
and that's something that you want to pass down generation to generation.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I mean, I was always told as a kid, you're not doing this shit. You're not going
Yeah.
into the ground. You're going to school and you're gonna go work. And here I am, just an office dweller at best. But it was part of that drive away from it. Like this doesn't need to be where units. Like if that is the mindset that a family unit is willing to pass on to its children, it may be that should be the mindset of the society passing on to its next generation.
Yeah.
Which brings me back to the thing that I'll kind of tie up the podcast with, because I really appreciated your discussion of being drawn back to grad school by people that told you, just come back here. You've got a spot. This is open for you. And I've had that conversation with several other folks who are working on their graduate degrees now in their mid-20s, and it's exactly the line that they expressed, that somebody here at this university saw them, reached out and said, be here. Right?
Yes.
Not as a sales pitch, not
Yes.
as a, wow, we need you at good old SIU, but we would like to nurture your talents.
Yes. Yeah.
Please be here.
I mean, I think that's obviously the brilliance of education in general, and that does happen at probably a lot of other universities. But I feel, for me, in my own personal story, it is what is so special about SIU. And I work with students. I'm so passionate about first generation students. I was a first generation student. I actually had family members that tried to talk me out of school.
Wow.
As being something silly. You don't need to do that. Work in the coal mine. No, I'm just kidding. They never said that for me because I'm a woman.
Kate Heist, who is very active with Women for Change and does the gardens and the sewing room and all that. She worked with my dad underground when she was pregnant with her daughter Jamie, who is a friend of mine. She was digging coal.
Wow.
Hand to God, toughest woman.
That's intense. That's intense.
It's just cool
Yeah.
to me to have she just represents so much to me in that aspect. Just like the tenacity of it. I gotta have her on the podcast too. So
Definitely.
I don't need to go off on a tangent.
Definitely.
Here,
Yeah, no, it nurtured. I did not, to be quite honest, so I said, I knew Carbondale would be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I knew I needed to get away from my family. You know what I mean? I knew I needed to make my own way. College was just a great way to do that.
Yeah.
And even though I had to fight a little bit to get here, it seemed, because it was something that nobody in my family had done, before. And so I was welcomed with open arms here. I was nurtured, and somebody saw in me that sense of you can continue, you can get, and quite frankly, I wouldn't be doing the job I'm doing now if I didn't have a graduate degree.
Yeah.
So it has been the game changer to just really see myself as, in academia, as an equal, as a, peer. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's and to the peers out there watching this episode, thanks for watching. I hope you take something away from this, same as I had. There were several key words that I thought I was going to use for a really good transition out, and then I just forgot all of them as I switched cameras. So you know what? We're just going to go with episode 65 of the WTF Carbondale podcast. Have a good one, folks, whatever that one may be.
Thank you.